Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CARES July webinar. My name is Laree Talbert, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that means to me is that it's been over 10 years since I've had to use any type of mood or mind-altering drug to change the way I feel. Recovery has changed. Thank you, George. Recovery has changed my life for the better. I'm a better mother. I'm a better daughter. I'm a better, much better employee. And I speak out about recovery because I want everybody to have the same opportunities that I've had. Um, I would like to do a little housekeeping before we get started and I announce our presenter. Um, Everyone will be muted throughout this broadcast, and that's just to keep down confusion. If you have a question or a comment, you can type it into the question pane or raise your hand. And when I get a chance to, when we get a little break, I'll call on you and you can ask your question. And I think, oh, also, we do not give out certificates for webinars. Please keep up with the webinars that you attend. And I think 1 or 2 days after the webinar, you should get a confirmation email thanking you for attending, and that could be used for your verification of the webinar. And without further ado, I will present to you George Brock, who is the co-founder of the CARES Academy. He's also a licensed professional counselor. Today, he will be presenting on There Must Be 50 Ways to George, I don't know the whole time to change the what is it, George?
Fight bias
To
in the
fight
work.
gender bias in the workplace. And with that, I give you George.
Thank you very much. So I do want to a little bit more in terms of what this is all about and explain.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
How to participate in today's webinar. And you all should have a control panel on the side of your screen. It may be collapsed, but if you click on that white triangle or that white arrow in the orange rectangle, it'll make that little thing go away so you can see the whole screen. Click on it again and it'll bring it back. So the best way to participate, first of all, is mute your phone or computer so that we don't hear background noise. Stuff happens and dogs bark and all kinds of things we hear that we don't need to hear. So if you would just mute your phone. You're probably already muted by Laree, but it's best practice is to go ahead and mute when you're not talking, and when you want to talk, unmute yourself. So best practice is to use your telephone and be sure to enter your PIN number, not the number that's shown here, but the one that's in your control panel. And there's two ways to ask a question. First, you can just type questions in and Laree will see them and she can relay your question.
Well, isn't that special?
Yeah, the other way is to raise your hand. I don't mean hold your hand up in the air, but on that little icon, that hand icon. And when we get the opportunity, Laree can unmute you and you can participate live in the webinar. And I'd really like for folks to be ready to read some of the material that's on the screen and ask questions and turn this into a discussion. So there is a handout. There's a section of the panel that's titled Handout, and all you have to do is click on it and you can download the handout. So what we're wanting to accomplish today is, after this session is over, you'll be able to recognize at least 5 types of bias and also the impact of multiple biases, because the fact of the matter is people have prejudices against multiple aspects of who we are. And that's what's commonly referred to as intersectionality. That's a big word, but that's what it's called in the literature. I also want you to be able to list 5 common workplace scenarios where bias situations occur, and then explain specifically how you would respond when those biases occur. This is a set of materials that were developed by an organization called Lean In, and obviously it's leanin.org, and it's dedicated to helping women achieve their ambitions and work to the world. And I encourage anyone who wants more information to go to leanin.org. There's lots of resources that are available. So why are we here? Well, basically, as research shows that gender bias is holding women back in the workplace. And our aim for this session is to learn what that bias is, how it arises, and what we can do to combat it at work. So we're really going to specifically talk about what this is, this thing called bias. And you've had some experience with this both during the CARES Academy, but also afterwards. But then I want to dive right into set the tone, and then dive right into specific situations and solutions. And at the end, spend time encouraging you with a closing activity to come up with what your next step will be. So to set the tone, just know that women experience bias because of their race, sexuality, age, religion, other aspects of their identity. And when these biases are compounded, that's when the discrimination people experience is even worse. And that really is the point of intersectionality. It's not just a bias, but there's multiple biases that are we react to people and how people react to us. And I really want to make this point. This doesn't just apply to women. It also, men experience gender bias. So we all fall into these traps. I mean, people of all genders can consciously or unconsciously make biased comments or behave in ways that disadvantage women. And we all need to look for bias and take steps to counteract it. That's why this program, I think, is really vital. So we'll go through specific examples and make some clear recommendations for what you can do. So when sharing stories about seeing or experiencing bias, please don't use people's names. If you want to own the story yourself and talk about your experience, I would just ask that you not name who the person was that caused the bias. Use some neutral pronoun, or just don't, it's not necessarily the subject was that caused the situation to be biasing. And then remember that everybody is here to learn and to do better. And an open and honest exchange is part of that process. So give folks the benefit of the doubt as we go through this material and discuss gender bias. So Laree, if you would, go ahead and launch poll question number 1.
Okay. All right, everybody. Poll question number 1. How much more likely are women than men to plan on leaving the workforce to focus on family? Can we please have 100% participation? We want to hear your thoughts.
So just take your little mouse and click on one of those options. What do you think?
And right now we only have 46%, 57. Come on, guys, up. Maybe like 10 more seconds. I'm interested to see what the popular answer is going to be. All righty. I'm going to close the poll now.
All right.
And How much more likely are women than men to plan on leaving the workforce to focus on family? About 15% voted on A. That's about the same, 2% or less for men and for women and men. B, twice as likely, 25% more women than men. That got 38% of the vote. 3 times more likely, 75% more women than men, got 46% of the vote. And I'm in the wrong meeting, but I'll stay. That's 0%.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so everybody's here that's supposed to be here.
So that's really interesting. And the correct answer is actually there's virtually no difference between men and women. Both plan on leaving the workforce to focus on family at about the same rate, and it's a relatively low rate. And this is based on national research. So percent or less actually is what the data indicates. So we kind of have this expectation that women and men don't. Well, in fact, yeah, some men do, and not necessarily many women. And so is indicative of how our bias is what we expect of different genders. So let's talk about some common biases that women experience at work. Anybody have any comments about that before we move on? If you do, raise your hand or type it into the text box.
No questions as of yet, George. I don't see any hands.
We'll move right on then.
Okay.
So in your handout, there is an explanation of five different types of bias and then double discrimination or intersectionality. And what I'd like to do is just play a short video. It's about, I don't know, 12 minutes long that explains common biases.
We all have unconscious biases. Our brains take in more information than they can process, so we rely on mental shortcuts in the world around us, which means we rely on stereotypes. And let me be clear, we all do this. Sometimes those mental shortcuts are helpful. If an animal is running towards you in the woods, you don't stop to think whether or not it's a bear before you decide what to do. You make a snap judgment. But relying on snap judgments about people can be very harmful. Experts at Harvard developed what's called the IAT, or the Implicit Association Test, to better understand the biases we commonly hold. The results are eye-opening. 76% of participants more readily associate men with career and women with family, regardless of their own gender. And 75% of participants show a preference for white people over Black people. And this is even true for half of Black participants. Let those numbers sink in for a moment. It's hard to admit our biases. We don't want to see ourselves falling into these traps. But no one is immune from bias, which means we all have work to do. This video series will help you understand the common biases women face. But research shows that awareness is not enough. We need to internalize that gender biases are harmful and learn how to counteract them in real life. From challenging yourself to slow down and make more measured decisions, to speaking up when you see biased behavior in others, we need to commit to be part of the solution. It's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Employees on diverse teams are more committed and work harder. And companies with more women in leadership have more generous employee policies and produce better business results. We all benefit when we tap everyone's talents and ideas, and we all rise when women rise.
Performance bias is based on deep-rooted assumptions about women's and men's abilities. we tend to underestimate women's performance and overestimate men's performance. As a result, women often have to accomplish more to show they're equally as competent as men. This is women are often hired based on past accomplishments. We need to see proof they have the right skills. And men are often hired based on future potential. We already assume they have the skills they need. To understand the impact of performance bias, consider what happens when you remove gender from decision making. When 10 major US orchestras use blind auditions, the odds of women making it past the first round improved by 50%. And replacing a woman's name with a man's name on a resume, odds of getting hired, and study after study shows the same pattern. Performance bias can have a big impact during hiring and performance reviews. It is even more pronounced when the criteria for reviews are unclear, which leaves room for individuals to rely on gut feelings and personal inferences, which of course means bias is more likely to influence their decisions. In one study, resumes for candidates for police chief were written, so one version was heavy on street smarts and the other was heavy on school smarts. When people were asked to define the for the job in advance, so before seeing the resumes, there was no bias against female candidates. But when they saw the resumes first, they ended up favoring whatever type of experience the male candidate had. So they valued street smarts when the male candidate and school smarts when the male candidate had school smarts. In other words, evaluators shifted the criteria around, so what ended up mattering was whatever experience the male candidate had. Performance bias often leads to missed opportunities and lower performance ratings for women, and both can have a huge impact on women's career progression.
Attribution bias is closely linked to performance bias. Because we tend to think women are less competent, we are less likely to give them credit for their accomplishments, and we are more likely to blame them for mistakes. Even when women and men work on tasks together, women often get less credit for success and more blame for failure. We also fall into the trap of thinking women's contributions are less valuable than men's. One place this happens is when women are talking. Women are more likely to be talked over and interrupted in meetings. In one study, men interrupted women 3 times as often as they interrupted other men. And women were also far more likely to interrupt other women, but they rarely interrupted men. Perhaps not surprisingly, because women are held to higher standards, tend to receive less credit, and wield less influence, their confidence often erodes. For example, when it comes to performance, women predict they'll do worse than they actually do. In contrast, men predict they'll do better than they actually do. Women are also less likely to think they're ready for a promotion than men. And men typically apply for jobs when they meet 60% of hiring criteria, while women wait until they meet 100%. However, it may not just be lack of confidence holding women back. Because we hold women to higher standards than men, women may rightfully feel like they have to hit a higher bar.
Women face what's called likability bias, also known as the likability penalty. They often face a social penalty when they assert themselves that men don't. This is rooted in age-old expectations of women and men. We expect men to be assertive, so when they take the lead, it feels natural to us. In contrast, we expect women to be kind and communal, so when they assert themselves, we often react unfavorably. We like them less. The likability bias surfaces in the way we describe women. Women are more likely to be described as intimidating, too aggressive, or bossy, words rarely used to describe men in the workplace. And you may have caught yourself having a negative response to a woman who has a strong leadership style or speaks directly. Being well-liked really matters. Ask yourself, who are you more likely to support and promote? The men with high marks across the board, or the woman who has equally high marks but is not as well liked? To make things more complicated, women also pay a penalty for being likable. When women are seen as agreeable and nice, we often consider them less competent. This double bind makes the workplace challenging for women. They need to assert themselves to be seen as effective. But when they assert themselves, they may be less liked. Men do not walk the same tightrope.
Motherhood triggers assumptions that women are less committed to their careers, less competent. It can intensify the performance bias that women already face. As a result, mothers are often given fewer opportunities and held to higher standards. The trap of thinking mothers are not as interested in their jobs now that they have kids, so we assume that they don't want that challenging assignment or to go on that big work trip. Because we think they're less committed, we're more likely to penalise them for small mistakes or oversights. Research shows that maternal bias is the strongest kind of gender bias. In one study, when PTA coordinator is added to a woman's resume, she is 79% less likely to be hired. She's half as likely to be promoted, and she's offered an average of $11,000 less in salary. Interestingly, maternal bias also starts early. As soon as women get engaged, pushback because we assume they're going to have children, and men face some pushback when they become. Studies show that fathers who take time off for family reasons receive lower performance ratings and experience steeper reductions in future earnings than mothers who do.
Affinity bias is what it sounds like. We gravitate towards people who are like ourselves, people who are similar in appearance, beliefs, and background. And we tend to avoid and even dislike people who are different from us. Affinity bias plays out in several ways in the workplace. In studies, mentors say they're attracted to protégés who remind them of themselves. Hiring managers are more likely to spend time interviewing people who are like them, and less time getting to know people who are different. Not surprisingly, they are more likely to give people like them a favorable evaluation. Because white men hold more positions of power and are more likely to gravitate towards other white men, affinity bias has a particularly negative effect on women and people of color. They can end up getting overlooked or left out.
Women of color face biases for being women and biases for being people of color. And LGBTQ women face biases for being women and biases for being LGBTQ. This compounded discrimination can be significantly greater than the sum of its parts. Women of color are particularly underrepresented in the corporate pipeline, behind white men, men of color, and white women. Compared to white women, women of color receive less support from managers, get less access to senior leaders, and are promoted more slowly. And Black women are particularly disadvantaged. This same dynamic holds true for LGBTQ women. Research shows that lesbians have a harder time securing employment than women more broadly. According to one study, when a woman has something on her resume that indicates she's LGBTQ, for example, volunteering for an advocacy group, she's far less likely to get a call back. Many women experience even more biases and types of discrimination. Imagine the compounding effect of being Asian, LGBTQ, and a woman. Or of being Black, Muslim, an immigrant, and a woman. Not surprisingly, research shows that people with 3 or more minority identities can feel like they don't belong anywhere. It's important to note that men can also be held back by bias against their race, sexual identity, religious beliefs, age, or background. You'll see examples of double discrimination in our bias cards. The important thing is that we're all aware of the different biases people face, and we all commit to fairness and equality for everyone.
All right, so I'd like to invite folks to chime in and say what was your main takeaway from that video? Got any hands raised, or?
All right, well, Mama, we have Benjamin Graham. Was your hand raised? I mean, Benjamin Young. I did unmute you. Was your hand raised? I think I clicked it off.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
We can.
George, question. I'm trying to see the distinction. Are we still talking about this level of bias equating to stigmatizing women? Is that what we're saying? Am I understanding? Okay.
So the bias is the attitude. When that attitude gets put into behavior, it becomes stigma and discrimination.
Now I'm on the page with you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question or your comment.
Rika Jones, you are unmuted.
Hey, Laree, it's Rika.
Hi.
Hey, Rika.
Hey, and I was wanting to kind of piggyback off of what the guy just said, and I don't know if it's more discrimination or racism too. It seems like the women of color seem to have a larger disadvantage, which is no surprise. But do we factor those in there too?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
So yes, race plays a major role, and it's as you probably took the IAT when you were in the CARES Academy.
Yeah.
And the bias, the preference for whiteness, it's more prevalent, but it still exists in non-whites. And
right.
Just think in kind of spiritual terms. In culture overall, what do we consider to be godlike? What just come to mind? Exactly. And
yeah.
things that are not white are considered not pure.
Yeah.
So very pervasive.
It definitely is, and it's more obvious, like it's been, accepted with where our country is. It's like it's okay now, and
That's exactly right.
yeah. So, okay. Thanks for that, George.
You're welcome.
Hey, Laree.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm gonna get out.
Good. Thank you. George, we have Frida Green, but I can't. Frida, it's not showing that you have a telephone or any type of audio device. So if you have a question, you can type it in, and I'll ask it for you. Anybody else have a question? Raise your hand now.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
we have one with Mary Packley has a question. George.
Mary.
Hey, Laree. Hey, George. I really don't have a question. I just have a general comment as an elder who's worked since I was 14 years old. I just want to say hallelujah for this webinar. These are things that I have felt and worked through my entire life. And I just want to say I'm grateful for this webinar and how it's being presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, one moment. Frida, unmute yourself and you can speak.
Frida.
You are self-muted. Unmute yourself. All right.
On that little icon, that speaker icon next to your name.
I guess we can come back to her, George. That's all I have for right now. Oh, wait a minute. Al Arrington. Al Arrington, you are unmuted. Unmute yourself, Al, and you can speak.
So if you see the little microphone icon right under that white arrow in the orange box, and that will unmute.
Hello?
Hey. Yes,
hey,
sir.
how you doing? How you doing, Ms. Laree and George?
Good.
I think it's a great webinar. I would like to know what is being done combat besides the education of this training to combat the biases that we experience, as CARES and stuff. What else is being done? What actions are being taken besides the education training?
Yeah. Well, locally, I can say that there are many groups, MAN, that are active in addressing discrimination and stigma. Not the least of which is Dr. Hawkins' One Small Change organization is dinners, what's called Chicago style dinners, where people get together and break bread and eat and talk about what their experiences are and what they can do to address these sorts of biases.
Okay.
There's other groups that are also doing that, and oh gosh, I can't think of her name. So if you're just Google racial bias or bias in Georgia, and these groups will come up.
Okay.
And right now, actually, I think One Small Change, you can sign up to attend any number of dinners that they're having around Indicator and in the greater Atlanta area. So you can get 5, 10 other people and really have some focused discussion around this.
Right. Well, I thank you guys for presenting this, and I think it's a great topic to be discussed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, George, I don't have any more questions.
Okay. Well, the next step is to just kind of go through some icebreakers. So what do you think? In a study of performance reviews, what % of women receive negative feedback on their personal style? Comments such as, you can sometimes be abrasive. And then what percentage of men do you think maybe had that same type of feedback? Well, actually, the data is pretty clear on this. It's one of those things where more women get that pushback and really do get negative feedback than men. And you can see it's 66% of people will respond negatively to women simply because in their performance appraisals, there may have been some challenges that the person faced and they reacted assertively. But it gets couched in negative terms as being abrasive or being bossy. We've had presidential candidates who faced that exact criticism because they were taking their own power and putting it on display. And that rubs some people the wrong way. So what do you think? When 1 in 10 senior leaders at their company is a woman, what % of men and what % of women think women are well represented in leadership? Well, 45% of men and 28% of women think 1 out of 10 is enough. And naturally that leads to some challenges. I mean, who would accept 1 out of 10 of any group that you're a part of being an adequate representation at the top levels of leadership? But yet we have that sort of internal bias.
Hey, George, I have a hand raised. Let's see if I can get them to be able to speak.
Yeah.
All right. You're self-muted. It's Frida. Frida, you're still self-muted. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
We can.
There you go.
Hey, Mr. Jones, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
So my question is, does this same action go on also with women that do get that that is in leadership role against other women once they get to that place of having that power like some men? Maybe because there are men still on top of them even though they're sitting in that chair? Or is it going on too with women against women as well?
great point. So it's not just men's bias against women we're talking about. It's also women's bias against other women.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a dynamic that is hard to push back on. I mean, if you push back on it, then you're being aggressive, and it doesn't really matter which gender is the attacker. You wind up getting penalized simply because you respond to it to defend yourself, and that's part of the rub.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, George. That's it for now.
Okay. So, want to get somebody to read what's on the screen. Who'd like to chime in on this?
All right. Come on, somebody, raise your hand. Okay, Dan, you are unmuted. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear
Now
you.
we can go, Dan.
Hey, George. Hey, Larry.
Is
How
this
y'all
Dan
doing?
the man?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Yes, it is. Says here, a colleague says they're glad to see so many women in leadership at your company. In reality, only 2 out of 15 senior leaders are women.
So why does that matter?
Because it matters if people think that women are well represented in leadership, when in reality, they're not. They're less likely to do anything to fix the problem. They simply don't see it. That's a loss for your company. When companies have more women in leadership, they tend to have more employee-friendly policies and produce better business results.
Nice. So, what do you think could be done about that?
It's a great question. You're asking a middle-aged white cisgendered man.
And you're entitled to have an opinion.
Oh, I've got them.
No doubt. Yeah, it's kind of like another part of the anatomy. Everybody's got at least one.
That's why I'm here learning, my brother.
Very good. How about some other folks that are on the webinar? What do you think?
Come on, guys, raise your hand.
What would you do in if you learned that in your organization there was a tiny representation of women?
We have Rika Jones has her hand raised. You can speak. Rika, you
Hey,
Hey, Rika.
diversity training for men and women, cultural, like diversity training where you put men and women together and allow them to have an open forum about things that need to be worked out in a company, or allow women to come on, or hire more women and allow them to set the tone or the precedent. If you have proof that when we're on board, the company has better performance, then it's kind of like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, we have Leroy Murphy. You are unmuted. Please unmute yourself. There you go.
Have I unmuted myself?
You're good. We can hear you.
Okay. Hello. How you doing, George? How you doing, Larry?
Hello.
Good.
Well, I was sitting here, and one of the things, being in some corporate situations like that, as a man, and if you're going against, I guess, the status quo with the men, sometimes you're looked at like, when you're defending the woman, that there should be more representation. You're looked at strangely. You're kind of almost outcasted.
There you go. Yeah. It puts you on the fringe of possibly not being in the in group anymore.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So then a lot of times you tend not to speak up in the open forum.
Yeah. Well, you might do it once, but twice you start thinking about, is it really in my best interest to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Okay, Shanna Hall, you are unmuted. You may speak. We can. You're unmuted, Shanna.
You with us, Shanna?
Okay, we can't hear her. Okay, that's all I have right now.
Okay, well, so what could you do? I mean, obviously, point specifically to the numbers. I mean, and you can say it's great that we've got those 2 women on the leadership team, but that's only 2 out of 15. Know that women are half of the world's population, and in some places a little more than half. So women are still really underrepresented. And you can share your opinion that having more women in leadership can be good for the company's bottom line. And if nothing else gets the powers that be's attention, it's the idea that this could actually improve profits. And when I use that word, I'm saying both PROFITS, but also PHROPHETS. Profits meaning bottom line dollars, but profits also being people who have skills and abilities and can stand up and be advocates for the company. Why does it matter? Well, when it comes to women in leadership, we're too satisfied with the status quo. And these low expectations are the result of many generations of inequality. It's almost as we kind of buy into the idea that the women are here to make babies or to have babies and take care of them, and the men are the ones who are supposed to go out and earn the bread and kill the animals and make sure we've got food and we're safe. But when there used to be no women in senior leadership, just seeing 1 or 2 can really feel like we're making progress. And it's hard to imagine a groundswell for change when we don't have higher expectations for what equality actually looks like. Somebody read this one for us. This is about a hiring situation. Oops, sorry.
Okay, raise your hand if you want willing to read. Okay, we have Marissa Cody. You can speak.
After an interview, a colleague says they didn't like how a woman candidate bragged about her strengths and accomplishments. Why it matters in general, candidates who are well liked are more likely to be hired. So when women are seen as less likable, they're often less likely to get the job. And companies that fail to hire talented women miss out on their contributions and leadership.
What do you think we ought to do about that?
Are you asking the reader?
I'm asking you, yes.
Oh, what do I think we need to do about that? Well, you know, I know when I went for my cares, it was really uncomfortable for me to brag about myself, you know? And so I do believe like over time I was taught, you know, there's something about being humble and how that ties into also being a woman. And so for me, it was like really uncomfortable, you know, to kind of show off and talk about what was great about me. And over time, that's kind of, I think that's been it's a little less difficult, but, you know, I don't know. I think that, I don't know. I think I really appreciate hearing other people talk about how great they are, you know, because it is such a difficult thing to do.
Well, and it's the difference between bragging and claiming you have skills and abilities that are beyond what you actually can do, yet being able to support yourself and the things that you are good at in a way that makes you attractive to other people.
Right.
And you're right. We have this sense that what really is noble is to be humble and quiet. Well, yeah, no, not really, particularly in the world of work.
George, I have a question that's been typed in by Shauna Hall.
Hey, Shauna, good.
Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. She wanted to know what are the initial steps they can take from the helping professionals' point of view.
To do what?
As far as with gender bias.
Oh, okay. Well, specific to this one, I think it's really relevant to specifically ask others to explore their thinking. So if we're talking about an interview and they said they didn't like how they bragged about their strengths and accomplishments, just simply say, well, that's really interesting. And do you think you'd have that reaction if a man did the same thing? So you can reframe the whole situation by saying something like, well, I noticed that too, but I don't see it as bragging. I just thought she was talking confidently about what she can do, her talents and her skills and her passions. So it's worth pointing out that a job interview is exactly the place to talk about your strengths. And you're not walking in there to just show a humble servant, but rather you're competing with other people in order to hopefully get the job. So it's really about taking the context into consideration. Now, related specifically to peers, why do you think we asked you to spend time thinking about your recovery elevator speech? Well, partly to give you opportunities to get the courage to step out and to really talk about what are, as opposed to early in recovery, what we heard a lot about were all the problems people had and all. I mean, a drunkalog is not focusing on your strengths. So we put a premium on you reflecting on your life, taking a strengths inventory, if you will, and then putting that into language that as you keep saying it over and over, you feel more empowered to actually speak up for yourself and to, talk about where you came from, but make sure you talking about the opposite of that you've accomplished since then. And it's that reflective process that over time allows you to develop a recovery elevator speech where you're really standing up for yourself, as opposed to I'm an addict and I'll always be an addict. No, I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is boom. And it's not bragging, it's simply finishing the story. And it's about knowing that you can rewrite that ending and do that periodically in your life so that you give yourself credit for what you've accomplished. And you can do that without it coming across in a bragging, braggadocious kind of way. But you can infuse humility in it by giving credit where credit is due. So this kind of gets to the heart of one of the key skills of advocacy, and it includes advocacy for ourselves.
George, do you have time for one more question?
We do.
Okay. Frida, you are unmuted.
Mr. George, do you think in the workforce, whether it's corporate or not, that this is happening in maybe it's for men, especially it's a natural thing for men to act this way, or do you think it's done subconsciously, or if it was brought to their attention, if there were training done in the workforce on this particular subject, do you think that would make a difference? Because I'm afraid that some men don't even be aware that there's this way. What do you think?
So you're concerned that even with training and even with an emphasis on equal opportunity and having policies that are equitable, so that people get promotions and are hired based on what they bring to the job, that still might not be enough. Well, I certainly think that's a very real possibility in a lot of companies. But again, kind of go back to the point that what the research clearly shows is that when we elevate women in the workplace, that improves the bottom line for the company. They sell more of whatever their product is. So why wouldn't we be able to do something to improve women's chances? I think you probably heard in the CARES Academy the saying, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats. But there will be those folks who see it as an infringement on their power, on their rightful place in the hierarchy that exists. And those are the people that often will be the most resistant and ambivalent at best about the changes that are occurring in our society and in our culture. So yeah, it's not going to be kind of an easy instant fix, but the bottom line is it improves the quality of life for everybody.
Thank you, George. I have one more. Avery, you are unmuted. You can go ahead with your question.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can.
We can hear you, Avery. How you doing?
George, man, good to hear from you, buddy.
Thanks. You too.
Hey, CARES going okay this week?
Oh man, got a great crew.
That's incredible. Yeah, I got a good friend of mine in there right now.
Cool.
He's doing good, but I don't know if this really was a question. I think it was more of a comment. But when you were speaking about elevator speech, and I was thinking back to my CARES and just kind of what that did for me, and what I have done, I guess, to empower the people around me. And of course, the people around me are all diverse. It's really just kind of allowed me to. In terms, because when I got to CARES, and I'll just share from my experience, when I got to CARES, it was, I very much didn't have a lot of self-esteem. Every bit of confidence that I portrayed was not false necessarily, but it was a sense of, I didn't want people to really know who I was, and all those things that come with being, having a low self-esteem. By using my elevator speech over and over again, and in different scenarios as well, whether it was simply in a meeting where it was very casual or it was up on the grand stage, I think what began to happen was exactly what you were talking about. I started changing behavior, even though I didn't feel like what I was saying.
Yeah.
Things just started opening up, and honestly, doors and windows, just blow open for me. And this was just 2 years ago. And, I'd love to sit here and, have all the answers and to be able to say, this is what we need to do for, gender bias, and this is what we need to do here, and but I don't know, other than just empowering the people around me. That's one of the things that, I've learned just over time. The only thing I really have control over is myself and how I can better myself and the people that I'm around,
Nice. And I want to affirm the fact that you telling that story has an impact on all of us that hear it. And to me, that's where the real magic is. You said sharing that elevator speech, even in informal conversations, emboldened you. It gave you more confidence. And even if you were speaking a little bit beyond what you thought you ought to be able to say because you weren't 100% confident, as you said it, you found yourself kind of doing it more, and you became that thing.
Yeah.
That's super powerful. I mean, so it's the power of narrative, and it's the power of our self narrative. You know, if you want to accomplish something, talk about that, and it will generate motivation that perhaps is what's necessary when you feel like I can't do that well yet. But you know, it's like learning to play a guitar. If you don't strum the strings, you won't ever get better at it.
That's right.
Thank you, Avery. That's it.
So why does it happen? Well, this particular situation where the person is accused of bragging, it's about the difference between what we expect men to do in terms of being assertive and promoting their own accomplishments, but having exactly the opposite reaction when women do the same thing. And it puts women candidates in a really difficult spot. You can't sell yourself without being touted as somebody who is exceeding what they're actually capable of. But if you don't say what you've accomplished and you don't talk about the progress that you've experienced and what skills you have, there's a really good chance you'll be overlooked. And this is rooted in what in the parlance of the Lean In organization is called the likability bias. And sometimes we would rather be liked than to see ourselves making progress towards the goal that we set up for ourselves. And if you think about our drug using buddies, that's one of the biggest challenges. I mean, when I stop using drugs, who am I going to hang out with? And at least with that group, they give me a little bit of positive feedback about who I am. And if I don't have that anymore, where am I going to get it from? So the idea is to simply tell your story in a way that encourages you recognize you're making progress. It's not about perfection. It's not about having reached the goal. It's just about you being able to specifically justify the things that you're saying about your skills in a way that really does demonstrate what you're capable of doing. So let's do one more here. Let's see, check the time real quick. Yeah, we're good for one more.
Okay.
Who wants to read this one about meeting dynamics?
I'm not sure I understand.
That was my phone.
Okay. We got Margaret Cummings. You are unmuted.
Hey, Margaret.
Margaret.
Can you hear me now?
Anybody else? Can anybody else read? Leroy Murphy, you are unmuted.
Hey, Leroy, go for it.
Unmute yourself, Leroy.
Uh-oh.
I'm sorry. In a meeting, a woman strongly agrees with a man about how to approach a problem. He says, we can talk about this. We can't talk about this anymore. She's getting too emotional. Do I read why it matters?
Please.
Why it matters. In a healthy workplace, debates happen all the time and often results in better ideas, clearer strategies, and stronger teams. Shutting down debate can be counterproductive to your company's goals. Plus, being tagged as over-emotional can diminish a woman's standing at work and send a message to other women that they shouldn't speak freely.
Wow.
So what are your ideas about what we could do in this area?
it really requires person has some compassion for for the woman or the other, for the woman's position, and that they or the person's position, that they have a right to speak, and they have a right to speak their experience. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I mean, as long as it's done appropriately, they should be able to speak that and not be judged.
Yeah. So maybe you'd speak up and say, well, I'm really interested, and I would like to hear more about what she has to say.
Yeah.
Something as simple as that. Cool.
Okay, we have Benjamin Young with his hand raised. You are unmuted, and you can speak, Ben.
George and all right. And what I was thinking while I was listening, I agree somewhat with what the gentleman, I think, was saying. We need those of us who are aware that this is taking place. Now that we know, we can't go back to not knowing. We need to start to be advocates in the workplace where we are.
Nice.
Someone has to speak up to start the conversation.
Perfect.
That's what I think.
So exactly, it's about speaking up and do something that supports that woman's point of view. So I mean, you could say, I think Loree is making a really good point, and we should consider it. Or you can specifically push back on the stigma of, oh, you're too emotional, and say she doesn't seem too emotional to me. Let's just keep.
Right.
Good.
Thank you, Ben. We have Rika Jones. You are unmuted.
Hey, this topic is not new. Women have been fighting for rights since forever. I think it's more of a moral decision, because men are taught. They are just taught, whether it's in a working relationship, whether it's in an intimate relationship, or just an acquaintance relationship, that women are emotional. Like you said, and with people in prominent positions, Hillary Clinton, for one, as smart and as talented as whatever she had to offer to bring to the table, men are conditioned to think that women are emotional creatures, so naturally they react that way. And so this to me, this argument is something that we are going to be having for the rest of our lives. It's not new. It's the same conversation that was happening 20 years ago, 50 years ago, and things have improved, with the rights that we have with EEOC and all of that stuff. But it's not like this is, like the guy was saying before, like this is nothing that's new. So I think that morally, the world is trying to improve, and people with like us that are carers, that people can see us from both sides. To me, it's more of a compassionate, moral position.
Very nice.
Yeah. So, and a spiritual thing, like you were saying. So.
What's the advantage to men saying, "Oh, you're too emotional"? What does that do for the man?
It may make him feel better about himself because of his insecurities.
Okay.
And because I work in a facility where I have more men clients in treatment than I do women. And I've been pondering and trying to figure out, what is that about? And if women are so emotional and that we're so why are the men in treatment and the women are not? Is it because we're taught to be strong, that we have to go on no matter what? And that men, I don't know. We can go into a whole nother tangent here, but it's the thing that we're taught.
Yes. And I appreciate you pondering this idea about women are supposed to be more emotional than men, and the connection between that and why more men are in treatment than women is really puzzling. But
yeah, absolutely.
is, men and women are both equally emotional. I mean, we have the same biological machines inside of us that create thinking and that create emotions. One of the things that happens, though, in social context is if men begin to demonstrate their emotion, oh my gosh, that means I'm losing some of my manhood.
Yeah.
Because the expectation is I'm supposed to be logical, not emotional.
Yes.
What leads to better health is recognizing emotion and talking about it. And that is part of what happens in treatment is people learn how to label emotions and how to express them and get that out instead of letting it seed and fester. So that's a really interesting observation you made about more men in treatment than women.
Yeah, I have. We have about 60 men.
Wow. Thank you.
It's something that I've been pondering and trying to figure out. It goes back to my thing where I feel like, you love your sons and you raise your daughters, kind of thing, where women are taught to do certain things. We're taught to take care of home. We're taught to raise children, where the man's job, or the boy's job as a little boy is, take the trash out, baby.
Right.
You better not cry if you get cut on a piece of glass while you're taking the trash out.
That's
It's kind of like the things that we're conditioned to think or to have in our system. So.
Right.
So
Male supposed to suck it up and keep going, and God forbid you actually shed a tear.
Yeah. So.
Thank you, Rika.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
We have Riley. You are unmuted.
Hey, Riley.
Riley, unmute yourself, please. There you go. Riley. Okay, we can't hear him.
Coming through.
But we have Rhonda Lacey Wade. You are unmuted. Unmute yourself and you can speak. Click the red microphone. There you go. Hi, Rhonda. I don't know, George, what's going on?
Okay. Well,
let's try one more. We have Al Arrington, if that's okay.
Hey, Al.
You are unmuted, Al. There you go.
How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I mean, I'm talking like on the flip side with me. I'm experiencing bias as a man with single children. I mean, with a single father, and I have custody of my 2 kids, which happened last year. And I have all female staff, supervisors female, and the CEO is female. And I'm getting some type of like biases, comments and stuff. Like my kids have emotional issues because it was a long court fight to get them. And now that I have them, they've been here. Next month will be a year. And I'm taking off to, deal with their emotional issues. Yes. Well, some comments that I'm getting is like, well, they should be, acclimated by now. It's been almost a year. And I'm thinking they're saying that you shouldn't take time off to, go, leave them by themselves at home, stuff like that. But they have emotional issues. So, I mean, I could understand the biases, but I'm saying that they're coming from women as well, and I have 3 sisters. So I'm used to women, being in my life and being raised around women, a lot of women. So I'm saying that like on the flip side, I'm experiencing that too as well. So what am I to say when, like, say for instance, my son, he got sent from school or whatever, and they're telling me to come get him, stuff, but my job is saying that, well, he'll be okay. You shouldn't take off to go to get him because he's a boy. I got 2 boys, and and some of the comments I'm hearing and stuff, they're coming from women. So what am I to do about that?
I get you. So if your children are females, they might not be saying, yeah, don't take off to go take care of.
Right. Yeah, that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
Because they're males. I believe it's like a double-edged sword. It's like, and so I experienced both and I get comments like I'm Mr. Mom and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's tough. And that's the bias that gets in the way. And I mean, are you somehow not performing your job up to expectations? Are you using too much leave? If the answers to those questions are, yeah, you're doing your job, and no, you're not taking more leave than you have, then let's talk about what the problem really is.
Like, what is the problem?
Exactly. That's the conversation. I mean, and I know, there are expectations, different expectations for men as there are to women. And the part is being able to sort through your sense of being a parent and what you need to do to take care of your children, regardless of the children's gender.
Right, exactly.
Kind of like a second-degree bias. It's not so much about you, maybe. It's just how you're raising your sons kind of conflicts with the way they think women or men should be raised differently than men.
Okay. I agree with you. I'm feeling it now.
Having that conversation is, that would be kind of the first step to express your concern about their bias in that regard and how it's affecting your ability to feel their support.
Right. And that's the problem right there, because I don't know how to say it, because it's coming from the supervisor. I don't know how to initiate that conversation where I'm feeling, I will let her know that I'm feeling that like a little bias going on, because if it was a woman, you would know that, it would be handled differently, or, the replies would be a lot different. And my supervisor, her kids are all grown. And, a lot of other women around there, their kids are grown. And I got 10 and 13-year-old boys. And it's just, it's like a gap there, So I do understand this scenario, but, I'm just presenting a flip side to it that that I'm going through right now. So, yeah, but thanks for the advice.
Well, you're welcome, and I look forward to hearing how it turns out for you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Do you need to move on, or do you want more questions?
Let's see. Yeah, I probably need to move on here in just a minute.
Okay. All right.
So, what color blanket do you buy your daughter versus your son? My guess is your immediate answer to that is you buy the boy blue and you buy the girl pink. Are you aware that less than 100 years ago, that standard was exactly the opposite? Pink was the color that was given to boys, and blue was the color that was given to girls. But somewhere along the line, that changed. But there's so much emotional attachment to it today that just the idea of giving a boy a pink blanket, many folks just can't understand why you would do that. So it's being able to justify what you think is the right thing to do, and it's facing up to the discrimination and the pushback that you'll get, and deciding to do that is a difficult decision. And I appreciate Al really bringing that dilemma that he's got to the surface, because this isn't easy, and we can talk all day long kind of flowery about how we really ought to change the world, but there's some real costs that are associated with this. So we've got a lot more scenarios, and that's why we're going to do more of these webinars, but I want to get to the really kind of important part of this, which is our closing activity. So I want you to think for just a few minutes, what is the one action, based on what you've heard today, that you're going to take to address gender bias in the workplace? So I'll ask you to take out a piece of paper and a pencil or pen and write down one action. Give you a couple of minutes to think about that and write it down, and then ask you to share with us what you think you might do to move this challenge forward. So when you're ready to chime in and share with us what your one action is, raise your hand.
Okay, I see Rhonda. Let's see if I can unmute you. You are unmuted. Oh, it's not letting me unmute you.
Oh no.
Rhonda, I don't know why.
Well,
let's try Margaret Cummings.
Because she didn't enter her PIN.
Oh, okay. Because it says I can't do it and she can't either. But we have Margaret Cummings. Let's see if we can get her to talk. Can you talk? You are unmuted, Margaret.
Hey, Margaret.
Oh no, not again. I'm sorry, Margaret. You can type in your question and I can ask it for you if you like.
Yeah. So if you would just soon not talk, type it in and Larry will read it to us.
And that's the same goes for you, Miss. I forgot who it was, but Rhonda. Penny Foskey just typed in the question and it says, "I'm going to hire another man. I have all women with the exception of one."
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Shauna Hall says one action is to use gender reversals in verbal examples to get the audience thinking outside the box.
Nice.
Let me see. Avery Nix, your hand. You are unmuted. You can speak.
Yeah, I'm in a unique position where I have opportunities to do a lot of different like presentations and trainings and things within my workplace. And I think a good presentation on diversity, especially the one in the CARES training that we have the opportunity to use, would be, fantastic. And you can relate that into gender biases.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Who was it? Benjamin Young. You're unmuted.
So what you think, Benjamin? What action you gonna take?
Ben? Okay.
Dang.
Well, we got Frida. I'm going to unmute you. Let's see if I can go. Frida, you're unmuted.
One of the things that I will continue to do is support other women in the workforce when they're trying to rise themselves up, and be an advocate for women in the workforce. And when I get to that level of leadership role as a woman, not forget what it was like and remember other women. So advocating for other women and supporting them as well, and also doing that with grace so I can protect the check too. And also, so that's one of the things that I'm gonna do.
Nice.
Thank you. I have Margaret Cummings typed in her one thing. She said that she would allow everyone to know that we have a voice and we each should be heard equally. Marlisa Bailey says she would check her own subconscious biases.
Okay.
And I don't know if you want any more because I have a couple of more hands raised.
Yeah. Keep going.
Okay. Leroy Murphy, you are unmuted. Unmute yourself.
Yes. So as I've been sitting here, and this has been so great, for me to address my own issues, as well as what we know about as a whole. But one of the things I know that I do currently, the team that I'm on where I work at now, they're predominantly all women with PhDs. And I think one of the things that I need to do is to acknowledge them and tell them how proud or how happy I am to see women in their positions doing so well. And I mean, all of them are like, in a sense of mine. And we get along, and I think that needs to go with starting the conversation every opportunity I get to start the conversation.
So really it's about giving them affirmations for what they've accomplished.
Absolutely. Encouragement, affirmation, acknowledgement, all that. They deserve that.
Very good.
Thank you. Katrina Harmon, you are unmuted.
Yes, they can women the same interview question. I know sometimes you go to interviews, they ask men a certain question, and ask the women a different question, but from the same questions all through the interview.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. And Rika Jones, your hand is raised. You can speak.
I work in an environment where I have 2 men and 2 women on my team. And so I think that for me, my goal is to build better relationships with my male team members, because automatically they assume that the females can do the work better than they can, or maybe they take advantage of it. I don't know what it is, but me and the female, we work harder than they do. So I think an open dialogue should be, developed between us as teammates to be able to communicate and get a better understanding of the male and female dynamic. Because I don't think that either sex understands the other sex as much as we need to or should.
Yeah. Well, there was a book that came out, I think it was in the 80s, called Men Are From Venus and Women Are From...
Yes, absolutely. Most definitely. So, yeah. And I do that, so just continue to do the things that, like I said, this is not anything new. And I think bridging gaps and getting a better understanding of people, whether it's men, women, black, white, is what we need as a whole.
Very nice.
Yeah. So.
And you're spot on, because and there's an example that we'll get into in a later webinar about, there's all the work tasks that people do, and then there's the work support tasks. So who makes the coffee? Who cleans up?
Right.
And often if women do it, it's seen as, well, that's what you're supposed to do, and you don't necessarily get credit for it. But if men do it, it's a you gotta make it say, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And that reflects that gender bias. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Melissa Beatty typed one more comment in, and she said she will use smaller settings / meetings with coworkers to create an opportunity to engage in team building exercises to empower others to self-reflect and to begin those conversations.
I like it. And know that self-reflection process is vital. It's not just go learn facts. Help people develop their own story, because we're constantly rewriting. We're not just what you've done up till today. It's where you see yourself headed that really is as important as being able to tell where you've come from.
All right, that's all I have right now. Thank you.
There's got to be more ways to support gender equality than what we've talked about today. So I encourage you to go to leanin.org, and there are what they call lean in circles that you can participate in online, and there's material about how you can start lean in circles at your organization. And you can also participate in the Women in the Workplace study. So again, there's lots of resources that are available, and I invite you to sign up for the next 2 50 Ways to Fight Bias webinars. The next one will be on September the 19th, starting at 5 o'clock. And then the third Thursday in October, in that month, we'll actually be doing it at 11:30 a.m. So thank you, Loree, for your expert guidance in doing all the behind the scenes work necessary to put these things on. I appreciate your participation, and we couldn't do it without you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
You're very welcome.
This is a great topic. Yeah. All righty. Thank you, everyone, for attending this July webinar. Oh, by the way, Dan says, well done, George. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much.
And Frida Green says she loves you, George.
Oh, how sweet.
Thank you. Thank you. But I want to remind everybody that you will get a confirmation email within the next few days. I want to thank everybody for coming. And Avery Nix tells you great job. Thanks, everybody. We'll see y'all next month.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, George.
She said to me, easy.